Hi, you guys. Thank you so much for coming this evening. My name is Jake Hamish. I'm one of the youth pastors at the Waters Church in Sartell. And we're so honored to be able to partner with Discovery tonight to put this together, this training. We are honored to have Free International with us, which is one of the leading human trafficking prevention organizations in America. And so we have Jody coming up here in just a little bit. Jody is based out of Mississippi. They have a base out of Las Vegas and out of Mississippi, and hopefully soon one in Minnesota. So that's going to be pretty sweet. Man, we're going to have a time at the end that there's going to be some Q&A and stuff like that. We actually have a text-in number, and so if you want to text in a question anytime during tonight, I'm going to give you a text-in number right now. That number is 320-316-3196. I'm going to go over that one more time. If you have any questions tonight, if you think of anything, if there's something that's said that you're like, hey, this sparked a question in you, you can text in that number. We decided to go this way. That way we're not passing a microphone. We're trying not to spread the virus or anything like that. And so we're going to just do it this way. And it's an anonymous number, so it comes in. I don't know who it is. Nobody's ratting out anybody if it's your question. You can ask whatever you want. It's anonymous. So the number again is 320-316-3196. 320-316-3196. And so I'll go over that when Jody finishes speaking tonight. And so that if you have questions again, you can text those in. Sweet. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Jody to come on up here. Would you give it up for him as he comes and does our training tonight? We're so excited to have him with us. Sweet.
He spoiled the surprise. I was going to say I'm just from south of here, so. Anybody from the south here? Just real quick. Good. We have translators if you don't get what I'm saying, so we sit close to them. Yeah, what did he just mean by that? So I do want to thank you for being here tonight. We've been in Minnesota since Saturday evening. We've been down in Wilmer, did a lot of trainings there. Have worked our way up here. For the rest of the week, we were here a year ago, did some things in Cold Spring and then over in the cities in Stillwater. And we travel all over the U.S. So I want to just kind of introduce myself to you so that you understand and know who we are. My name's Jody Dice. You say it like you roll them, the last name. It's just spelt different. But my wife Wendy is here with me. She travels with me all over the country. We're actually here for other things, but we're taking this time to train and to educate and talk. And when I say what we're going to talk about tonight, several of you have probably read, seen, or seen something on human trafficking, or probably been through certain levels of education on that. And so a lot of this may be a repeat to you. Some of it may be new stuff for you. I feel like one of the biggest things for me to do is I like to kill the myths of human trafficking, because it's not helping our survivors anywhere out there whenever we share about kids being sold on Wayfair. Not true, never did happen. It has nothing to do with that, but people love to share it. One thing I can say about those types of things, at least it got the conversation started. It had people that hasn't talked about human trafficking or child exploitation or anything in a long time. And so I appreciate that conversation and that door being open. On top of that, besides doing all the trainings, I have at the point now, I've trained probably well over between 5,000 and 6,000 fire and EMS all around the nation. I've trained I don't know how many thousands of law officers now. We did a couple of those down in Wilmer. Going to do another one tomorrow. I am a law officer. I serve as an agent with the Crime Suppression Unit back in Mississippi. And so we run a lot of predator stings where we go after guys. Our mentality is if we can hurt the demand, there's no need for supply, right? And so we like to go after those in Mississippi and now in Minnesota, as well as most states. They have adopted how the federal government sees predators and johns that buy girls that are being exploited and sold, not buying prostitution, but buying children or buying women that are in a trafficking situation. And the johns are in a prosecutable situation just like the trafficker is. They're seen just as evil, and in our eyes, they're seen the same way. If you're buying the girl, you're just as bad as the guy selling the girl, because he wouldn't be selling girls if there wasn't a market for buying them in the first place. And so we like to go after those guys. We like to make that point known. And so tonight we're going to talk probably a little bit about that. We'll cover the laws. We'll cover the breakdowns, why trafficking is what it is. We'll also talk about myths. We'll talk about the difference between trafficking and smuggling. There seems to be some misconceptions about that as well. And so tonight you're going to drink from a fire hydrant probably of information. But on top of it, I want to say this up front. I do not and have never considered myself an expert on this topic. Prostitution is called the game, and it's a game for a reason because it seems to be an ever-evolving process. And so I do not see myself as an expert because I see myself as a continued student learning on how to fight this. I see myself as someone that tries to stand in the way to stop and prevent what's coming and try to stay on the edge of things that are out there. Sadly, we find ourselves on the back side of it. Our organization, my team, not only do we do trainings and we do operations where we assist law enforcement in stings and recoveries, but we also do school assemblies. We have a school assembly program called Say Something School Assembly, where we actually have a survivor at the end that tells her story. It's all teed up for her, and she shares her story. And between the Say Something school assemblies as well as all the operations, our team has 477 recoveries now nationwide, with our youngest victim being 5 years old and our oldest one being 40 years old. And so we'll kind of touch on some of those stories just from what I've seen. Now, what happens in Mississippi is probably different than what happens in Minnesota. But not only do I work in Mississippi, we work in Vegas on a regular basis where our headquarters is at. So we're going out there all the time, running ops out there. So we see every element of it, from the massage parlors to the brothels, the legal brothels in Pahrump, to all the way down to probably, I would say, the largest percentage of our cases are what's called familial trafficking cases. And so we will talk and touch on those as well. But today I want to have an introduction to modern day slavery. To me, the name trafficking is the worst name for this problem, because the conception of trafficking is, and it has nothing to do with the case a trafficking case, is there's a highway that runs through my town and no-go girls are being brought up and down the highway, and that's what we hear so many times. There's an interstate, and it's people build it on that term trafficking, that it's about the moving of somebody, when in reality, trafficking is about the exploitation of somebody. And so we're going to break those laws down to what it is. Because we work with the U.S. Attorney's Office and vetted with them on a regular basis, we sit through their trainings and they push out information to us. I'm not a guy that loves stats, and I'm going to tell you why I do not like stats. There are tons of organizations that will use stats, and I have to say ours was guilty of that in the early stages of it. Like, human trafficking last year netted $61 billion and had more profit gain than Nike, Starbucks, and Google combined. I've heard that saying before. We don't know that. There's no evidential proof that made that. Why? Traffickers don't do tax returns. I don't know. Well, there are over 383,000 victims of human trafficking in the United States this year alone. We don't know that. Because if they didn't do their tax returns, I guarantee you they didn't fill a census out on their victims, okay? So we don't know that. We have to go based on percentages of cases. There's also a figure of how many of those cases were prosecuted and how many of those were pled down, and then how many of those were never seen or found. It is estimated that probably only 2 to 7% of the cases of trafficking that are prosecuted are ever cases that were found in that region of where that happened at. You talk to law enforcement officers on a regular basis and ask them about narcotic bust. How many narcotic busts did they have in their area? They may say, we ran 5,000 narcotic busts in Sartell. I have no proof of that. I'm just saying that off the top of this bald head, okay? They may say we had 5,000 narcotic cases this past year alone. You can then turn around and ask, how many narcotic cases were there out there that you missed? And they'll say, oh, thousands. There was even probably 10 times more than that or 50 times more than that. It's the same way with human trafficking. It's a lot of them we do not see or know. The other one is we can't prove how many cases were prosecuted last year in the United States, because we have DAs and county prosecutors and even state attorney generals, those that, nothing against them, they do their job, but they have to accept plea deals and things. Maybe the case isn't strong enough that they feel like can be won in court, and they'll plead it down for something less than trafficking. And because of that, it's never listed in through the Fusion Center statistics that this is a human trafficking case. So I'm not going to stand here and give you those kind of numbers, but I will give you estimates. We do have estimates. In fact, last year, the Department of Justice said that they estimate between 50,000 and 70,000 victims are brought to the United States every year for forced prostitution and forced labor. Complete estimate, okay? That's a tough number. And when we think human trafficking, we always think about people brought to our country, and they are, massage parlors and things like that. And if you take that number and you think about 50,000 this year, 50,000 next year, 50,000 the next year, in 3 years you have the potential of 150,000 victims brought to our country every year for either forced prostitution or forced labor. In that, we know some will be recovered, some will escape, and some will perish. But the number that they give out as an estimate that so many people count as a fact is they estimate that within the boundaries of the United States, that there are between 100,000 and 300,000 of our own women and children at risk of being exploited every year. If that's the case, we're producing more victims in 1 year's time which would be brought to our country in a 3-year period. You know what that tells me about the United States? That there's depravity in our country like we've never seen before, that we would consume our own and that we would exploit our own. I think that's the reason I have probably one of the, as with what we do, I have probably the hardest issue with familial trafficking over anything. I'm a dad of daughters. And I'm also a granddad with 3 grandchildren and 1 more coming in a few weeks. And I could never fathom someone hurting or willingly doing something to make gain off of my own kid. Not even close. And to know that there are parents out there that are struggling with their addictions and things, then see, the only way that I can get a fix is trade my kid for a hit on a pipe or for money to go get groceries or for rent or whatever the case may be. Human trafficking, better known as slavery, involves the commercial exchange and exploitation of humans for prostitution and labor. When we say human trafficking, the number one thing everyone talks about, because that's what the movies are about, that's what TV shows are about, is sex trafficking. And the thing is there's just as many, if not more, potential victims of labor trafficking than sex trafficking, because there can be higher numbers in one case versus a trafficking of sex. Sex trafficking can produce upwards of 1, 2, 5 victims in any given night in a bust, on a trafficking bust, if we were working one. Labor trafficking can be upwards of 20 and 30. In fact, we had one that was involved in the chicken industry back in Mississippi that had over 200 victims that were brought into it that were able to get asylum and was protected by the Trafficking Victims Protection Act from that point forward. So we can see that that side has a huge explosion, and we seem to overlook it. I have issues with the undocumented way that we view things. We have all these undocumented illegals, and we look at it this way. You've got to take each victim on a case-by-case person, because there are several here that are not documented or that don't have any type of identification, because they're here under assumption that they were getting something, but now they're having to work off a debt to obtain it. That doesn't make them a illegal immigrant. That makes them a victim of labor trafficking and needing of help. The truth is, we have more people in captivity today than any other time in history. I use this picture because, as an example, this is what our survivors that advocate with us and work with us on a regular basis hate these types of images. Because when we talk about being in captivity today, everyone thinks about the kid behind bars, hands tied, help me on the bottom. And I have a survivor named Leah Dalzell. She says, I hate that, because if that's what you're looking for, you're missing me. And she says, in fact, you'll walk past me in the 3 W's. I'm going to assume that you have these 3 W's here in this area. Waffle House, Walgreens, and Walmart. In her time of exploitation, she said, just like you, just like anybody else, she would go to Waffle House. Do you know why she would be seen at Waffle House at all hours of the night? She's working all hours of the night, right? She can go there, buy a couple of pieces of toast, get a glass of water, and just sustain herself to keep working the rest of the night. So you would find her in a Waffle House, 24-hour restaurant, so to speak, is what that purpose is. Walgreens. Most Walgreens are 24-hour pharmacies that you can go in and get what they're needing while they're out working. And so that part, And we know Walmart, everybody goes to Walmart. So even traffic victims go to Walmart. And we can even go down a whole other training about what to look for. So this happens, but not very often. 477 cases of trafficking that we've seen, and none of them were in a cage, none of them were chained up. In fact, this past school year before COVID hit, we were doing school assemblies in Escambia County, which is Pensacola, Florida, and we were doing them in the Joplin, Missouri area within a 3-week time frame. After those two, we had over 100, out of those school districts, we had 160 mandatory reports for sexual abuse, assault, molestation, suicidal thoughts, and addiction issues that we had to stay and file a report on because kids came forward saying, this is what's happening to me. Out of the sexual assault, abuse, and molestation, once it was investigated, has now turned into 19 federal trafficking of minor cases. Why? Because they lived in a place that they weren't very far from a state line. Family members were taking them across state lines and prostituting them for whatever the reason, because it was the norm. They saw it as sexual abuse, came forward for help, sitting in our classroom, sitting in our desk, and talking every day to friends. And people knew there was something going on in their life. There was something weird, something was going on bad. She cries all the time. There's all these red flags. And so that is proof that they're not bound up and tied up in the back of a U-Haul going down the interstate. They're sitting in the car next to you at the Sonic or anything like that. And so that's why we want to kind of break those stereotypes and understand what our victims look like. The other thing is, I hate to just use the term victim or a survivor or human trafficking. Most of these, in the area that we spend our most time working, is working in minors and minors cases. Every one of these kids have a name. Every one of these have an age and a home that they were from. Every one of these had somebody that cared about them, and they range from a number of ages. Sadly, we were in New Orleans, and we seen a 9-year-old recovered out of a brothel that a guy paid $6,000 for an hour with a 9-year-old, had tickets to the Super Bowl because the Super Bowl was in New Orleans that year, had grandchildren older than the girl that he just paid to have sex with. So I think it's important that we see faces, we see names, and we understand it's somebody's child, it's someone's sister, it's someone's granddaughter, that we get to that point of understanding. So understand you're entering a world of extreme exploitation, coercion, and abuse. This is a 16-year-old girl from Pensacola, Florida. Her pimp beat her merciless because she refused to give a guy oral sex. The rest of her body looked even worse than this. So be aware these criminals are highly capable, their victims are vulnerable and completely unaware of the danger. The more and more that we travel around with, especially when it involves minors, we're starting to see that minors are, if it engages earlier, the average age of a girl drawn into prostitution statistically is 12 to 14. The reason they say 12 to 14 because those are usually the ages of highest of minors of recoveries. But they're estimating that those being drawn into it, something was happened to them earlier, as young as 8, 9, and 10 years of age or something like that. When you start that case, there's a psychological thing happening in that child's mind and the abuse that's happening to her body, that she accepts that as a normal sign of affection. And so by the time she is 12, 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, it's easily to be used as a form of manipulation and coercion to get her to work, because that's just part of the way that people show love. And that's the tough part about understanding what's going on in minors' lives. So be prepared. Their pain and trauma is real. To reach them, you have to understand their journey. My wife and I and her parents, we lived close enough at the point we was maybe 3 hours from New Orleans, and we would always go see the New Orleans Saints play football down in the Superdome, go to Bourbon Street and things. And whenever I was young and I was in high school, you saw the prostitutes walking Bourbon Street, and in the French Quarters, it was all funny and games and, oh, it's the girls, it's the working girls and things like that. But when your eyes are open to what kind of world this really is, I'm going to tell you right now, I have people, this one of the questions, what about the girls that want to do this? What about the girls that choose this lifestyle? Well, you know what? The 40-year-old lady that we recovered was pimping herself out, but her family was looking for her because she was strung out on drugs, and previous in her life she had been pimp-driven, and that was the only way that she could think of to make money because that's what she had done for so long. And I've yet to meet anybody that you start talking to them or listening to their forensic interviews that said, you know what, when I was 6 years old, I thought when I grew up, this is what I'd like to do for a living. So no, I don't believe it's a lifestyle that's chosen because it's beneficial. I believe there's something that happened in this person's life at some point that's all the value of their life was put on was a sexual value. And that's put them in this place. So now we change from seeing them as prostitutes and hookers to people that are vulnerable and exploited. People that have souls, people that have lives, people that want something better for life than where they are right now. And that's how we want to come into it. And one of my leading things that I do when I'm training law enforcement is that I want them to understand the victim-centered mindset, but I want them to see that person not as a simple bust, but what's going on in her life. I work for a great police chief, and I love this guy. And we do prostitution stings. He's already made it very clear. We're not putting charges on girls. Our job is to, if they want out, we're extending mercy. There will be no charges dropped. Any narcotics that's on them will be destroyed, and we will help them get either into a rehab center, into a rehabilitation center. My goal is to help them, not to just put something else on them that burns them down to continue in this lifestyle. And I like that. It helps us then, when you're out there, to understand we're out here for something more than an arrest count. We're out here for something more that helps, more beneficial. These are the legal definitions federally on what human trafficking is. Sex trafficking is where a commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person induced to perform such an act has not obtained 18 years of age. This is the area that I probably spend the most time working in. Labor trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. You see the common denominator there, those words of force, fraud, or coercion for whatever type of labor trafficking is. The thing about sex trafficking is, and we will talk probably more about that than labor trafficking, but we'll break down exactly what force, fraud, and coercion is. But for a minor under the age of 18, here in Minnesota and Mississippi, Arkansas, Kentucky, doesn't matter where you go, all you have to do is prove that there is an exchange of value for the exploitation of a minor. Now, when we run ops and things, we run it to where the minor is below the age of consensual sex. But in defense of sex trafficking of a minor, consensual sex is not even a defense. We know defense attorneys are going to play that very well. So when we're busting Johns, we always go to just below. In Mississippi, as it is in Minnesota, consensual sex age is 16, I believe, here, right? And so in Mississippi, we always are posing as a 14 and 15-year-old girl. When we were, sadly, our last op that we had, when we revealed our age as not being 18 or 19, but being 14 or 15, 40% of our Johns cut off all conversation. They were done because you're too young. Well, I guess there is some honor among perverts, but 60% of them continued the conversation. They didn't have a problem that we were no longer 18 and 19 and that we were 14 or 15. And in fact, some of them, that made it even worse. That just ramped them up even harder in the conversations. And so we'll get into that a little deeper. It's a growing problem worldwide, and this is a global statistic that says human trafficking is now tied as the second largest and fastest growing criminal activity in the world and in the United States. Basically, they're saying it's tying or surpassing the drug trade industry. Number one still being, the gun trade industry, illegal guns and trafficking of guns, with drugs still being number one. Now I'm hearing organizations that are saying that it's going to surpass the drug trade industry. I don't believe that. Why? Because the two go hand in hand too much. We'll talk about that even more so now, but we're seeing more now people where the leading cause for drugs, our survivor, the whole reason that she was drawn in this was her addiction. Had no place to go. Her pimp was also her drug dealer, 60-year-old guy. And this 60-year-old man let her move into his house. Oh, you want drugs? I'll give you a drug. I'll keep you alone. I'll help you with your addiction. And then at some point, she had to pay the debt. Well, you can't just keep living here for free. You're going to have to help tote the load. You're going to have to help pay some of the expenses around here. And so guys that were coming in, instead of buying drugs, were buying sex from her. And so that was the vicious lifestyle, and he would use the drugs to keep her working as to stay in it. So, does human trafficking happen in Sartell, Minnesota? You tell me. I don't live here. I tell people all the time, you give me 48 hours in your town, I guarantee you I'll find it. I can show it to you in 45 minutes in Las Vegas. But here, and the reason that you can find it so quickly in most any town, Wilmer, Minnesota. I was just there. A little bitty town in the middle of farm country. We can find it there. Already started looking and started locating potential things there already. And the reason is you find what you're looking for. If you start looking for it, things that considers itself hidden and out of sight are the things that you'll start locating. And it'll be probably more obvious than you realize. And no, it won't be the girls walking down the track, because it's too cold here to walk down the track. I'm just going to be honest with you. It's dead winter for me. When I got here, this is winter in Mississippi, because it's like 70-something degrees back home. So we know that it happens. When we understand what the law says, when we understand what it actually looks like, then it starts making more sense of that it's, oh yeah, I know something like this. The sad thing is, I've been training firefighters before, and firefighters will come back and say, yeah, I was on a call. I was at this house, and I saw this 2 years ago. I knew it was something, but I couldn't prove it was exploitation, or I couldn't prove that it was abuse, but there was something off right there, and I've thought about it, but I didn't know who to call, or since I didn't know who to call, should I have called the national hotline number, and when is the right time to call the hotline number? And I'm like, I would rather you call anybody. Call your attorney general's office, your human trafficking coordinator for your state, call the national trafficking hotline number and have it investigated and proven not to be something, than to be sitting here talking to me 2 years later saying, man, I wish I'd have done something, because I don't know whatever happened to that kid, or I don't ever know what happened to that lady. So that's why I say it's so important, go ahead and make that call. Our layers of trafficking are this, and someone asked me, says, what do you consider the worst, and what do you consider like the most high end? And to me, as I was referencing earlier, familial trafficking is to me the lowest of low of trafficking of victims. That if you're entrusted with a child, whether it's a foster child or a natural child, but you're entrusted with a child and you would exploit them, that's as low as it gets for me. I have zero tolerance in that area, just to be honest with you, that you would exploit someone or manipulate them just because they're family or there's that close connection. And sadly, that is probably, like I said, the largest majority. Then the next step up, I would say, would be street-level prostitution that's involved with street gangs and street level like that. Then you start walking right on up to like the brothels and organized gangs and gang-driven prostitution. When I'm talking about, you got your little community gangs, the guys that think they're something big, but they're still in the illegal activity of prostitution, drugs, and things of that, which is probably trafficking. But when you jump up to like organized gangs, if you're in Vegas, you're going to deal with Blood and Crips that run out of LA into that, MS-13, things of that nature. Or you go to the one percenters and the motorcycle gangs, all this, you start finding it involved with these other locations around. All types of deals. Then it bounces up from that to the international trafficking of persons, like Eastern European type of trafficking, or Asian trafficking, or Hispanic trafficking that are brought in on an international scale. Those are the highest of the high level, I would say. Some of those are really hard to bust, and some of those are fairly easy. I would say the Asian massage parlors, nail salons, things of that layers are a little easier to kind of get into, identify, and make a sting on versus, say, the Russian mob and the Russian driving crews that are dealing in high-end Eastern European girls that are charging, $5,000 an hour. So you see that those levels kind of fluctuate. So the three elements, you have your victim by either recruiting, harboring, moving them, whatever the case is. You're keeping them by force, fraud, or coercion for whatever type of trafficking it is. We're going to break down force, fraud, or coercion right now. Leah that I was telling you about that's on our team, Leah's an African-American girl. Her mama is white. She was a drug addict. Believed that her father was probably mom's drug dealer at some point. She doesn't even know her dad, doesn't have any relationship with him. raised in a white family, went through all kinds of stuff in backwoods Mississippi. This was not in a major town. Leah was never taken further than 10 miles from her house when she was exploited, so that throws the whole up and down the highway thing out the window. And so, but the thing was, is whenever we were first talking to Leah, we found Leah in a place called Teen Challenge for Women. It was a drug rehab center for women in southern Mississippi, just outside of New Orleans. And as we were talking to her, she says, all these things you're talking about happened to me. Bad things happened to me. And I can sit and she did. She told us some of the stuff that was going on or had happened in her life. She says, but I'm not one of them. And I'm like, what's a them? What's one of them? And she says, a trafficking victim. I'm like, what do you mean you're not a trafficking victim? She says, well, I'm not the little white girl with the help me on the bottom. Everything that she'd ever seen, as I was referencing earlier, I'm not one of them. So I'm not a trafficking victim. I'm just a drug addict that got into prostitution and I couldn't get out, and the guy would never let me leave. And so she started going through the things, and I said, we were on our way to Billings, Montana to speak at a conference there at the University of Montana, Billings. And I asked her to go with me just to tell her story because I wanted people to hear. She's a great presenter, great speaker, and I wanted them to hear her story. But we were on a plane, and I opened my computer up and pulled this screen up. And I said, Leah, I need you to do me a favor. As we're getting ready for this event that we're coming to, in fact, we were flying into Minneapolis from Atlanta at that point. And I said, I want you to go through this list. And she started going through the list of the force side. And she said, oh, he beat me several times. In fact, broke my nose. He's held a knife to my throat. He raped me. He would lock me in my room, actually tie the doorknob to another doorknob if my family came in, just so that I wouldn't say anything or have any communications with my family. Over here, she'd say, oh yeah, he always told me I'd get a cut of the money. I never got any of the money. He told me he loved me all the time. I was the best thing ever happened to him. He said if I ever ran that he would do something to my little brothers or go get my other family members. Again, that controlled communication, would never let her talk to someone. She even said that he photo and videoed her several times. Then she goes on down to the verbal and psychological abuse and punishment for misbehavior and controlling of her money. And I said, Leah, I just needed you to pick one of those out. Because the statute says by force, fraud, big word there, or coercion. Not all of the above. And it was at that moment that she realized if you start looking at these and this is what the victim's gone through, then no, she wasn't just a crackhead prostitute as she saw herself. She was a victim of human trafficking. And so this is the same thing that I asked law enforcement. How many of the girls that you're picking up on your standard prostitution bus at the hotel or the truck stop or wherever you're finding them at and you're making the bus, how many of them, if you set them down and had them pick out things on this, would pick that out even though they're doing it because they chose to do that? Or they have a pimp or whatever the case may be. If you start going through, it doesn't take long to realize that a pimp is just a glorified name for a trafficker. Okay, so when you start picking out the types of things that has happened in your life or in this girl's life, rolling down through there, it doesn't take long to realize, now this just isn't a prostitution bust no more. This is a good thing. If we want to talk on a political side, this is a good thing because now you're changing the case from a prostitution bust to a trafficking bust. This is something that's going to stick. It's going to get you way better press. And you kind of have to sell that to some of those guys that you're trying to make them start seeing things in a different light. Ultimately, I want them to see the victim as a victim, not just as another case. Just not another simple bust. That's what I really want them to see. But sometimes you have to put it into their relational world that they understand, wait a minute, I'm just not busting her on a possession charge and a solicitation charge. Now I've got this guy that we can get her to communicate. That's why it's so important to have advocacy centers that this girl can go into. That she's not going to open up and just start building your case for you the night that you put her in the back of a car. It's going to take weeks to get the trust for her to start opening up and knowing I'm finally in a safe place and I can talk, because the beginning, she's going to hate your guts. Most of them hate our guts. I understand that. I'm fine with that because I'm doing what it takes to get her a better lifestyle and get her out of something that is horrible, that eventually she'll appreciate what happened. Eventually she'll find hope. Eventually she'll find that joy again. The difference between smuggling and trafficking is the misconception here. Smuggling is a crime against the public interest in regulating non-citizens. You'll never see any smuggling charges pushed out on Americans being smuggled around. It will always be on undocumented people. Trafficking is a crime against human civil rights of a victim. In fact, if you go to the FBI right now and say there's a smuggling of victims being brought into Minneapolis from Korea, or either however you want to look at it, it will fall under a totally different division. Human trafficking falls under the civil rights division because human trafficking is seen as a civil rights violation, where smuggling is found as an immigration. The FBI will actually say this isn't our case now. This goes over to Homeland, or this goes to immigration, and it'll roll completely out of their wheelhouse at that point. The person being moved is complicit, where in trafficking, initial consent of the victim to migrate is not even determinative. That's why I was saying earlier, it doesn't matter if they're being moved around or not. It doesn't really matter. Smuggling is generally a one-time interaction where traveling of a person is held for service by coercion, usually over a period of time. As you're rolling through there, smuggling also is a focus on the transportation side, like I mentioned earlier, where trafficking is focused on the denials of liberty. So that's why I said the word trafficking is a bad word to me. It doesn't do justice to what the name of what the crime actually is. In fact, I don't know if you remember, there was a couple of years ago in San Antonio, Texas. I knew some of the U.S. attorneys involved with that case. We kind of got to meet. They were actually a part of southern Louisiana, and then they moved over to Texas, and then one of them actually came and was working in Mississippi at the U.S. Attorney's Office before being replaced by our current U.S. Attorney. And he was talking about the case of the 18-wheeler load of people that was pulled into San Antonio, and the mainstream media was pushing it as one of the worst trafficking disasters ever because these people were in the back of the van, they suffocated, and they died in the heat. It was a horrific, horrific thing. And it was horrific. I'm not downplaying it, but it was not trafficking as the media was professing it. It was a smuggling case. It was people that had paid a guy, a coyote, to bring them across the southern border, hid into an 18-wheeler. When things kind of went bad and he started feeling pressure, he just dumped the truck in a parking lot and just took off and didn't unlock the back doors, and that's why the people died from heat exhaustion and things inside of it. In what types of work are people commonly trafficked? These are probably your most commons that you will see wherever you go in Mississippi as well as up here. Trafficking of people in a regular basis, both labor and sex trafficking, honestly, it's anyone that will help you make money, and you're making money off of them. So when you go down in our area, I will say that agricultural, whether it's the chicken industry, farming industry, or even landscape industry, you'll see a lot more of that probably in our area. We see a lot of the traveling crews that go out and they're begging or peddling. They'll actually bus people around and drop them off at places, and they have a quota that they have to fill. So when you're seeing this homeless person begging, a lot of times if they're being picked up and transported and dropped, we've had that over from the Vicksburg area. There was actually a dentist involved with that over there at one point. You start running through things around our country, you start seeing some of the stuff that you would walk by and you're like, this, if I don't see them, it's not their kind of moment, or this isn't what typically trafficking looks like. Remember, force, fraud, or coercion. Why are they working? What are they doing to get their work? All the way down to, on the sexual side, prostitution, exotic dancing, things like that, pornography. Our youngest victim, 5 years old, what happened to her? Her dad was selling her for money and trading her for drugs. So for the production of child pornography, this other guy was actually videoing her and photographing her and selling these images online. Dad knew willingly that there was an exploitation of this child happening, so that makes Dad the trafficker. The other guy was a producer and distributor of child pornography, so that's why that case run that way. So it was the pornography side, but there had to be the dad willingly knowing that there was going to be a sexual exploitation of this child happening. And that's where that one rolled that way. The scope of the problem in 2005, the International Labor Organization affiliated with the UN estimated, as we were saying earlier, these are all estimates, 12.3 million persons were victims of labor and sex trafficking worldwide. You can go on down, 20.9 million at any given time. And then those numbers jumped just a few years later. 2017, the estimate was 40.3 million people in modern-day slavery today, and 1 in 4 victims of those are children. Those a number that I wanted you to see. 5.4 victims of modern slavery from every 1,000 people in the world. That was from 2017. And those numbers seem to double about every 3 years, and we're in that third year now. So we can only estimate and guess where we're at right now. So why are we seeing street-level prostitution, street-level gangs, the little low-life, thug-type lifestyle running with trafficking and prostitution over drug trade? Why? It's all about money, right? Who makes the most money? How do you make the money? What's the dangers of making money? What's the punishment for what you do if you get caught making the money? All these things start weighing in. So a pimp, if he has 2 girls making $500 a night per girl, that means each night this guy's making $1,000, going into the cities and coming back, making money just like that. In 1 year's time, if they don't ever take a night off, $365,000 a year. That's a low estimate in the first place, just to be honest with you, a $500 a night quota. Our standard night that we normally see is usually around $1,000 to $1,500 a night, so per girl. So that would only mean, in most cases, that she sleeps with 5 guys for 15 to 30 minutes. So those numbers are usually way higher on the types of money, but this is just for simple math. Endless supply, few people to pay, low risk of folks testifying against you, where a cocaine dealer has greater financial outlays for what he does. He has to buy more product in order to sell it. With that, he has to deal with some extremely dangerous people. So there's a limited supply of drugs. He has competition with other drug dealers out there, and it's real easy to get someone to flip on you on drug charges. Okay? In fact, most girls would cop the charge themselves. That's what they're instructed. Just take the prostitution charge. Odds are it'll be a $350, $400 misdemeanor. I'll pay you, get you out. We'll just move to another town. You won't have to worry about it, but you better not flip on me because you know what happened to XYZ last time. And so it's just a renewable income. If he can halfway keep those girls remotely healthy, keep them strung along just enough, he's making money like crazy. Georgia Bureau of Investigation has busted tons of pimps in the last 3 years in the Atlanta, Georgia area. And they have come up with what their math was on these pimps that were running these prostitution and trafficking rings. And on any given week, the average pimp in Atlanta, Georgia was making between $18,000 and $42,000 a week. He ain't gonna make that at McDonald's. Don't care you what the pay is. It's not gonna happen. And so it's about the money. It's always going to be trails back to the money. How are they recruited? Women, men who are already prostitutes, and they would draw them out. A different lifestyle, maybe clothing, money, exciting life. You see these. Romantic relationship with the trafficker, physical, sexual assault, addiction to drugs or alcohol, other vulnerabilities, youth that are abused, neglected, children, runaways. Some of the things that I will tell you right now that I see even more so in schools than any time is that romantic relationship. You meet this guy online, he understands how horrible your parents are, and he's got horrible parents, and he wants to meet you. It's so easy to lure someone out that way because, you know what, anybody can be what they want to be on these. I know, I get to do that. In fact, I'll have parents, firemen, well, you train a bunch of firemen, I'm just going to tell you right now, those guys are ready to take on hell with an axe and a pick in any minute, just when it especially involves kids. But when you get done with the training, they're like, my kids are never going to a ball game again. They're not going to the mall again. They're not going to a movie. They are not getting out of my sight. I mean, these guys are like going nuts over this. And you're like, I tell them all the time, I'm not worried about your kid going to town. I'm not worried about your kid going to the movies. They're traveling with friends, and you teach them the responsibilities of head on a swivel and traveling and talking to people. That doesn't bother me. Because predators are opportunists. I feel sorry for guys that own white vans because they get busted up on Facebook. There's a white van driving through our neighborhood. There was a white van circling around Dollar General. Yeah, things like that all the time. You're like, I was just looking for a park. It's a big van, kind of thing. Predators, they're not putting the X's on the back windshield of your car and seeing if it was a male or female or young or old. They're not doing that. They're opportunists. They're looking for easy. You come to me willingly, and it's a better defense for me. Oh, we met online, we were talking, she came to me, I didn't kidnap her. That's how the majority of those work. So I tell those guys, I'm not worried about them going out. I'm worrying about who you let them bring in their bedroom and their bathroom at night. That's who I worry about. The leading producer right now, I know we got some teenagers in here. In fact, I spoke at a youth group last night in Wilmer, 200-something students in a room much like this, stadium seating, and so I did this little poll. I like to do it around. I'm like, well, in fact, we can do it right now. How many of you right now, your social media platform of choice right now is Facebook? You can clap if that's your profile. You notice none of the students clapped. You know why? Because you're on it. My parents are on there, 74 years old. They're on Facebook. Students could care less about all the political arguing and jockeying and all that junk on there. They don't want that drama. They're not into that. Too many old folks on Facebook. How many of your social media platform of choice is Instagram? I said a few more. I like Instagram too. I got all kinds of travel pics. That's what mine normally is. A little more. I saw students clap that time a little more. Okay, so we're getting close to them. But the adults started slowing down. I'm just going to tell you. How many of you, your social media platform of choice right now is Snapchat? Look at all the young folks. Yeah, we got a guy here. You know, this guy is weird. No. In that auditorium, I asked that, and the applause for Facebook were all the youth workers in there working, and maybe 3 or 4 kids that probably mom and dad's watching what they do on social media like crazy. Instagram, it was good 50% with both adults and youth. But when I said Snapchat, man, the roof about came off that building. I was like, all right, we're good. Let me tell you why Snapchat is growing so fast. I can have my conversations, I can text, I can message on a regular basis. If there's something I don't care, I can set the sensitivity on it and it just dissolves away. Anything I send or anything sent to me goes away. And that's nice, because if mom did pick up my phone and scroll through it, it's gone. Guess what? There's no such thing as digital footprints disappearing. In fact, Snapchat's database, because Snapchat is a US-based application, their databases are subpoenable. So we can subpoena your account, and everything that you've ever sent or received is recorded and forever there. And we like that because Snapchat now is the leading producer of child pornography in our nation than any other thing out there today. And that's the scary part. And you know who's producing it? Not some old bald white guy in a beater shirt in a trailer park that's throwing it up on the internet, but an 8th grade girl that just got a request from her boyfriend to send a topless pic, and she does it and sends it off to him. We just had a case 2 years ago, it was, I believe now, 4 years. Oh, yes. Man, time flies in this world. 4 years ago. 4 years ago, we had a case in Mississippi where an 8th grade girl, and the reason I said 8th grade, this was truly happened. We had an 8th grade girl, that happened. Her boyfriend, a fellow 8th grader at this school, Brandon Middle School, asked her for a picture. And probably had already exchanged several pictures prior to this, but this one was the one that was actually of nudity, a topless pic. She sends it to him, and he does what any 8th grader going through puberty does, right? He saves that picture. And then he sends it to 11 of his buddies. Hey, check out what my girlfriend looks like and what she sent me. And one of those was a police officer's son that had been raised right, that come to dad and said, Dad, I know this girl. This isn't just a picture off the internet. She's in my class. Kid that was raised right and realized something was wrong, and he said something about what he saw. He didn't wait around. But this is what, it went all the way to the state attorney general's office and our ICAC unit, which is the Internet Crimes Against Children unit. It went to them, and this is what they have to deal with. You have an 8th grader that produced child pornography and distributed over cellular and internet service. That's a federal offense. That's just not a state offense. That's a federal offense, okay? Now you've got another 8th grade male that's in possession of child pornography and 11 counts of distributing child pornography. And then you got 11 more guys that are in possession of child pornography. How are you going to take that one to court? Because every one of the students are of double-digit age and it's exploitation of minors involved, they can be tried federally as an adult and have to register as a sex offender the rest of their life starting in the 8th grade, all over a stupid decision. Thus the reason this is the most dangerous recruiting tool out there today. It's like giving a 13-year-old kid the keys to a Lamborghini full of gas and said, there's the interstate, see how fast you can go. So we've got to start talking to our kids. We don't have to be just the overbearing, because then those same firemen that I was referencing earlier are now going home confiscating iPads and phones and everything. I'll let you know when you can talk to somebody, Write the old school letter, fold it 3 different ways and tuck it in and send it across the file. We'd have a lot less trouble if y'all learned how to text message the way we did in the 80s. Way much better lifestyle. So why do the victims stay in this lifestyle? Oh, they love this. He treats me so good. It's a great life. It's the best of things. Most of the girls I talk to says, this is all that I've ever known. This is the best I'll ever be. No one will want me now. Do you know what I've been through? Do you know how people look at me? So who would want me now? So if I'm going to have any form of life or relationship, I'd just rather stay in this. The sad thing is, for most of our survivors, they have to choose the less of 2 evils to be happy in life. And that happiness is a fake happiness. It just means I'm accepting what it is at that moment. Religious or cultural beliefs, we'll just roll all these through. When you start talking to and you start going through those meetings and you're listening to a girl talk about why she stayed in this lifestyle. First thing is, if it's a violent lifestyle, there's things in their life that happens that they can't control or they don't want to be a part of. My youngest daughter was in a domestic violence situation. And I didn't understand, because as a dad, you hurt people that hurt your kid, right? That's how we deal with things. And it just wasn't working out. I couldn't make that happen. But the part about it is when my daughter we finally convinced her after numerous times of things that happened to her to get out. And it took being beat unconscious twice in one night that we finally got her back home across state lines where she was back with us. And then there was little things happening in her life that I could not make sense about, that she would open the refrigerator, pour herself a glass of milk, and then walk back to her room, and the refrigerator's wide open. There's a jug of milk with the top off and a glass of milk poured that she went in and poured and never took back to the room. And I'm like, what are you doing? Why are you wasting milk? Or the always response that Dad would say is just common sense. Just use common sense, babe. Or why don't you leave? You could just walk away from this any day. Till I had to sit down with the therapists that are working with domestic violence victims. And the same thing that is affecting domestic violence victims is also affecting our trafficking victims. After so long in it, the part of your brain that controls common sense, simple decision making, not choice making, simple decision making, starts getting cut off. And the longer they're in that lifestyle, the bigger that gap starts getting. And in fact, a simple decision to either what to wear today or what to eat or what to drink becomes the most confusing decision of the day, and we expect them to walk away from someone that's exploiting them. They're not going to do it. That's a normal of routine in their life. And that's tough for us in law enforcement. That's tough as us as family members that are dealing with something in that situation to understand that. But we also have to stand. I tell people all the time, the easiest part of what we do is locating a victim and even getting the victim out of the situation, whether through force of law enforcement and busts and stings or them finally kind of somewhat getting it. The hardest part of what we do and the dirtiest part is the long aftercare that comes for that, the counseling, the therapy, and walking down that dark road that's a long, dark, messy road that some people get tired of walking down the road with. Oh, but TV makes it like it's so great. They hug you, they laugh, they're excited. You rescue me, you're my savior, we're going to go and life's going to be happily ever after, and it's never that lifestyle. Other things is they feel like they've lost their only support system. Foster care is another one. Pregnancy's involved. And I'm just going to throw these up. There's so many of them, I don't want to have to read them. And you're welcome to take pictures of the slides, too. I forgot to say that at the beginning, because I know there are people that sometimes try to write things. And like I said, you're drinking from a fire hose tonight. So. Why do they stay? They're staying to survive. That's the number one thing I tell law enforcement on a regular basis. Do you know why she's lying to you, or she's saying that she's not going to flip, or she's not going to tell you who her pimp is or where she's been or any of that? Because she knows odds are you're still going to probably put the cuffs on her. You're still going to put her in the back of the car. And once he finds out that she said anything, he's on her. He can beat her and ultimately kill her, because there's also been recoveries of fatalities, not just survivors. So we understand the dark side of that, and we have to kind of understand that they're doing whatever it takes to survive. The other thing that we've noticed is the high amount of kids in foster care industry that get sucked out into this lifestyle. Why? I don't know about Minnesota's foster care industry. We call it CPS in Mississippi, Child Protective Services. It used to be DHS, and Department of Homeland Security came in and said, you can't use our initials, and so they changed it to CPS. And the thing with DPS was, in Mississippi, our system is broke, bud. And I mean, I'm going to say this country, we broke. It is toe up. It's not a good system at all. I think our state system has good things in place, but there's a lack of communication between the state and the county offices that are trying to communicate it. And so we're having kids that just slip through the cracks. In fact, last year alone, there was over 72 kids unaccounted for in our CPS systems. They might have been in the good home somewhere. We don't know. It was just sloppy way of being cared. The other part of why it is so bad is, do you know how many kids, especially troubled kids that are involved in some sort of sexual abuse, assault, or in a trafficking situation, they get bounced from place to place to place to place to place, because there's no home in Mississippi for minors. So they're ultimately put in Child Protective Services. If they're put in Child Protective Services and there's not a parent or a place available that can take them, guess where they go? Juvie lockup. They're not a criminal, but there's no placement for them. So now they're being punished for being recovered. And so the very thing that they're looking for is family. They're looking for some sort of acceptance. And you don't know how many times that you talk to a young lady that says, I got abused in life and different foster homes. I got placed from place to place to place. And this guy come up to me. We were in Rapid City, South Dakota doing school assemblies. And a girl came up to me. She said, I'm tired of being raped by my family members. She was a Native American on the res. Incest was rampant there. And she says, I've been raped numerous times. And there's a guy in L.A. that wants me to come live with him. I know he's wanting me to be a prostitute, but at least I'll get paid for what's happening to me instead of it being taken from me on a regular basis. Makes absolutely no sense to me. But to her, it was the less of two evils. And the same thing with our foster care industry. Possible trafficking red flags are these here: if they're not free to leave or don't feel like they can come and go at any given time, live or near work the premises. These are all the typical red flags that you would normally see in any type of setting that are still listed as in the commercial sex industry, has a pimp or madam, uncle, is unpaid, or paid very little, or paid only through tips, is not in control of his or own documents. And then when I say that, those documents don't have to, that's just ID even. Driver's license falls under that. Works excessively long hours, unusual hours, not allowed breaks. We can come on through. Monitoring and surveillance. Homes and businesses that have tons of cameras and dogs or things, fences, are the premises. What this is basically saying is the premises designed to keep someone in the facility. One of the guys on our team, his name is Brad Dennis. They worked a Chinese trafficking deal in Pensacola, Florida, and the house had 2 bedrooms where the burglar bars were actually screwed in through the walls and the windows, where the victims could not even open the windows. And then the doors were closed into the hall and locked from the hall side so that you couldn't get into the rooms. The bad thing about the doors is I like building things. An interior door is a hollow core door. I can stick a foot through a hollow core door. That's easy. These guys had framed up 36-inch exterior doors with the metal facade in and out. So if you went into that house, you could see a 1/2-inch deadbolt that slid through the facing of a door, and it was designed for people to be locked into that room. And then they were put into a van and taken to a Chinese restaurant and worked, and they would work there for anywhere between 4 and 6 weeks. and then they were moved to another city, another town, working in another one, and another group would roll in. And so these are what we talk about, being able to understand what is happening in their life, what does the facilities look like. Other ones are, I always like to get guys asking questions. When it involves someone from another country, what brings you to the United States? Why are you here? You can get some really interesting questions. If they're from Eastern Europe, you'll get the traditional, I'm here on student visa, I'm working off student loan. You'll get that every time. It doesn't matter where you're at. If you ask that question in a massage parlor in Las Vegas or a nail salon in certain places, I don't speak English. I don't understand. Even though they've understood everything up to what color nail you want or whatever you're asking for at that point, they don't understand the conversation anymore. So things like that. Or I'm just here visiting my uncle, things, any of those things. Other things is that they've been branded by a trafficker. These are brands that we have seen around, and basically it's nothing more than something that has maybe the pimp's name or something. I'm going to tell you, branding is starting to phase. So those of y'all that work in this industry, maybe you work in nonprofits, I'll just tell you now, the branding thing is slowly starting to phase out as you would see it. Why? Because it's getting a lot of attention now. People are talking about it a lot, and so there's a lot of attention being drawn to it. But these are just some brands on girls that's their pimps' names and stuff. Never, ever, ever, 400 and something cases now, have I ever seen a brand that looks like that. Barcodes, don't even get me started. Now, we have seen brands inside the lips. I will say this is something that just happened on a case back where we're at. The girl did have a brand, but it looked nothing like, and I tell law enforcement this now, when I'm training, you look for these types of brands, tattoos somewhere behind the neck, base of the neck, somewhere on their body, on their breast, anything like that. But now they're coming out with pedicures and manicures, and the pimp's name will be embedded in some of these fancy manicures. Case going to trial in January where we're at, that was what the girl's brand was in her fingernail. So that's something that we'd never seen before. And the investigator we had just happened to be very quick on it, because when she was talking, she had both hands on the table and she was clicking her fingernails, and he just happened to look down, and they were, one of them was a different color than the rest, and then he happened to realize, that looks like a money bag. And then he recognized, because a lot of the pimps that have been busted before, your state fusion center has a tattoo database for a lot of them, and in that, he recognized that as one of them that he had to work before and knew that he was back in town again. Teen victims, if they're under the age of 18 and providing any kind of commercial sex act, these are the red flags to look for them. Significantly older boyfriend, travels with an older adult that's not their guardian on a regular basis, has things more expensive than, this is probably one of the biggest red flags that faculty and teachers see in schools. Here's a girl, they know that she can't afford these types of purses, clothing, things of that nature. They're coming to school with this type of stuff because now all of a sudden they can afford them. Big red flag. Other things are, the kid was a great student, always on time, looked like they were going somewhere, going to do great things, and now all of a sudden they're failing in school, they're late for school, they're missing school a lot, those types of things. A chronic runaway is another big one. I will say this, if you have a student or you know a student that one of these things is happening to, doesn't make it human trafficking, okay? So she doesn't come to school on time all the time. Maybe she's just lazy and doesn't get up. Okay, some of us struggle with that and don't like to get up, on cold days. But if you have 2 or 3 or 4 of these markers, that's a red flag. That's significant enough to at least grant the conversation. Hey, what's going on in your life? What's been happening lately? Who is this guy you're dating now? Stuff like that. Trafficking Victims Protection Act, I referenced that earlier about a case. It's a great tool that we have to help victims that are trafficked. Especially if they're not from the United States and have documentation. If you can help them, if law enforcement will help them, they can offer them a TVPA to where they can stay, which gives them a temporary visa while they're here in the United States. Here are just some penalties I just want to throw up on laws. Trafficking of a person can be up to 2 to 20 years. These are the fines to them. If it's a minor, it can be 5 to 20 years with $20,000 to $100,000 in fines. Procuring for involuntary servanthood all the way up to procuring of sexual servitude of a minor. Prostitution offenses, these are things that you'll see on a regular basis, or how they're being charged, can be fined up to $200 or jailed up to 6 months. If the person engaged in prostitution as a direct result of a victim of trafficking, immunity exists for that offense. That's what we try to help. In fact, we still know that young ladies that past cases are still pending on their head, and it's found out later that they're trafficking. And so we have a guy on our team that is a part of the Miami Law and an assistant U.S. attorney that he can connect her with an attorney or legal representation that can then go back and get those past charges dropped, because if she's a trafficking victim now, odds are when you busted her for prostitution last year or 2 years ago, it was under the same deal, and so it helps it where you can help them through that. Procuring of prostitution, this is for guys wanting to buy. Promoting, pimping is the other word. You see the offenses and the charges on those. These are some of those same indicators. I'm just going to put this up there for you to take pictures of. We rolled through it. I put it up and blow it up a little bigger so that you can get a copy of it on a regular basis. I'll give you, I'm all in your camera, bro. Ain't I? Do a selfie with you. Next slide. Y'all ready? We'll throw that one up. These are some of the same ones that we've already referenced. It just makes it a little bigger so you'll be able to read them later. And we'll roll on to this. This right here probably was what got us into this. I have no desire, my wife and I had no desire to work in the world of human trafficking. We were doing school assemblies for years, worked in youth ministry for years, and we helped Free International at the Super Bowl in New Orleans in 2013. We came back to Mississippi and just went back to doing our bullying and suicide school assemblies and healthy choices type assemblies, and we were in a very rural place. And when I say rural, there's a green sign on the highway that says Clara. And if you look about 250, 300 yards down the road, you can see the back of the other green sign that says Clara. So you just kind of blow through Clara. You don't stop in Clara. So there's maybe like a little, I think it was a little store with a post office in one end of it, and then a school, a little middle school. And we were doing a school assembly there. The girl was 14 years old that came up to us at the end of the assembly saying that she wanted to kill herself. And we were addressing that and waiting for the counselor to come talk to her and get her help. And it was in that process that we're just having conversations started with her, and it was hot. It was May, and she had an oversized hoodie on and her hands up in her sleeves and arms folded tight, and it was all the way up. She'd never lift her head. But during our conversations, the more and more she talked, she started pulling sleeves, unzipped the hoodie a little bit, and that was when we started seeing restraint bruises on her wrist, a choke bruise around her neck. I asked her a simple question: what was the best day of your life ever? Just to kind of get a conversation started. I get that way. If things get uncomfortable, I'm going to try to make you laugh or smile or something. And she said, oh, that was easy about 6 weeks ago. And I said, what happened there? I mean, did you get something cool or something? She says, no, my mom went to prison. She'll be gone in about 15 years. I thought the best day of a 14-year-old 7th grader's life is your mom just went to prison. And she said, well, you don't understand. My mom traded sex for drugs one night and got pregnant, and I'm the byproduct of that. And so I've always been known as her little trick. And that was her little nickname that Mom would give her, and that's all she would call her. And a name has value. You know, I'm named after my granddad, so if you call me by my real name, Joseph, that referenced my granddad in my book. My grandson that's going to be born on December the 7th, they're going to name him Joseph. So it's kind of cool that whenever he hears that name, he's going to think of G. Diddy, you know. I'm a cool granddad. I got this cool hip-hop G. Diddy name, you know. My wife, she's Honey, so she's got this cool name like Honey. She ain't no Mama or Granny or nothing like that. That's what we call them back home. But the little girl had bruising that got our attention in that conversation. And the fact that she had no value, and for the last 4 years, Mom had been trading her for drugs. Mom found something of value because Mom had no value in herself no more. The drugs had deteriorated her body, her looks, everything. And so she just went to the next thing that she had in her possession that she could trade or sell, and that was her kid. And that was our introduction to this, and that was the face that we saw when we laid our head at night, and that was the face we saw when we woke up every morning that you just couldn't get away from it, that drew us into this lifestyle of fighting it. Other red flag, here's another one you can take a picture of. If it's someone that's not from here, and you're in the middle of an interview or conversation with them, most of them story of where they've been and all those places, that's especially for a law enforcement, that's an easy way to start realizing there's something wrong with this story, because they're going to be from all over the board. They're going to be bouncing all over the place. That's a major red flag. That's a type of disorientation and confusion. Some of it is from mental block. Some of it is they've slept in a car all night long and have no idea where they've traveled from. We've had a victim one time that said that they were from another state, and then 3 minutes later in the conversation they say another state, and it's probably because they've worked in those 2 or 3 different states. And this is the National Trafficking Hotline. Most of y'all have probably seen this number, but I like to put it up anyway. In fact, I would even encourage you to just program this number in your phone. If you go and look to the National Human Trafficking Hotline's website and you look at that number, and they'll have statistics by state of how many calls have come in on that number. The misconception about this number, that when it was first put up, there's great organizations and groups around that have, with good intent, put up billboards. Are you trafficked? Call this number. It's stuck on the back of a stall in a bathroom at the rest area truck stop. If you're trafficked, call this number. The percentage of victims of human trafficking that call that number is single-digit percentage. 3-4% at best, maybe 5% in certain areas. The largest majority of the people that call that number are people like you. You see something that doesn't make sense, and then you make that call and you say something. Why? You talked about earlier, the majority of victims don't self-identify as a victim of human trafficking. I'm just a hooker, I'm a prostitute, whatever the case may be. Or the other one is, they're not in control of a phone at sometimes, and they can't make that call. He's got her phone. It's just like when we're talking to girls online and we're booking their ads, some of those you're actually talking to the pimp himself, not her. And then he sends her wherever. I think that was it. Yep, that was the last one. And like I said, I know that I threw a lot of information at you in an hour and 15 minutes. And so I wanted to take a time just to answer questions, let you ask anything that you want. I know they're probably coming in by text messages, and we'll try to answer them. If I do not know the answer, I'm not going to make up one. There are others do that. I'm jokingly was going to say that. I'll just be honest with you. There are things that I might not know. But if you're in here and you happen to know, like if someone asks a resource or someone nearby, I'm not familiar with centers and placements and places like that in Minnesota. I'm just going to be honest. If I was coming in working here, the first thing I'm going to talk to when I'm talking to your Attorney General's offices and your fusion centers, I'm going to find where placement of victim and victim services and all of that is, so that we know where a victim can go that is recovered. So I'm just going to go ahead and lay that one out there. If that was one of your questions, I don't know. So that one's answered.
I don't know. I'm just going to add to what Jody just said, is that we actually have the Central Minnesota Sexual Assault Center here, and they have a human trafficking branch or whatever. And so, man, if you want more information about what they do and stuff like that afterwards, you can go and grab information from their booth outside. And so here's the first question that I had Jody come in. Has COVID stopped human trafficking? We're in a pandemic. Has it stopped what we're doing?
I can tell you how it's affected us. At the very onset, early stages of it, it seemed to decrease. Prostitution, online prostitution decreased. Things like that started to kind of bottom out a little bit. And then stir craziness kicked in, right? Cabin fever, whatever you want to call it. And because people were at home, it started ramping up. And we started seeing a lot more online activity. One of our guys that takes care of all the internet crimes that we work with on a regular basis says another form of trafficking has emerged that will probably never go away because of COVID now, and that is sex webcams. That a lot of the victims on there that are being paid by the watch and being able to pay for whatever act the girl would perform, the person receiving that money that is controlling the girl is the one making that money. So online sex webcams, which means that probably, if you want to know, our pornography addiction is probably going to go out the roof now in our country to a whole new level. Pornography also, I will tell you right now, is probably one of the top funders of trafficking of victims, because just in Las Vegas alone, a lot of the victims that are in the pornographic industry are in some form or fashion in an exploited situation as well, especially in amateur pornography.
Sweet. If you have a question that you want, I have some coming in here, but
Oh,
if you
one
have,
other thing I will answer
yeah,
to
go
that
for
as
it.
well. The other problem with COVID, even right now, that it hasn't ended, and just what you're about to experience starting again tomorrow at midnight. Y'all better go eat good tonight and tomorrow, because your restaurant closes at midnight. Bus started stopping. We couldn't do stings or bust or anything because victims couldn't be taken to hospitals and stuff without having to be tested and quarantined or whatever rolling in that was listed as a non-emergency situation when they were brought in. And also stings were halted because you could not detain anyone in detention centers because they limited the amount that could be brought into detention centers. So basically, if you busted a guy trying to buy sex or bust a guy in procuring sex with a minor, he goes, gets processed, and gets to walk out immediately on the spot because there was no detention to him.
Okay, sorry. Next question was, if we notice a red flag and we call the hotline to report it, what typically happens next? Is there an investigation by police? What's their role in that?
So how that number works is this. It's manned 24 hours a day in 172 languages in Washington, D.C. When that call comes into that, in every state there are responders to the national hotline number. Your number one person that gets that call is whoever your human trafficking coordinator is with the state attorney general's office. From there, if it is like Sartell, there's a policeman or an investigator for Sartell Police Department that is listed as the trafficking investigator here. That same tip for that region goes to them. So it's almost like an immediate spread. If it hits, the tip was given for something that was happening in Sartell, your attorney general will get it. Usually your state police will get that same notification, and then the local law enforcement agency that is registered with that number gets that call. We have seen where places that maybe no one locally was registered, and the feds got the call, and usually they had someone on scene within 20 minutes of the call being made. So that just shows you how quick that it does. It's not like, okay, we'll get to this Monday morning. No, it goes out immediately once that call is processed. And they coach you through the call. Let me tell you that as well. You're not going to call and it's going to be like, I saw something and it was bad. No, they're going to walk you through that process. What did you see that was bad? Where are you right now? They want every ounce of information that you can give them, all the way to a room number, house number, address. If you don't know, you just say, I don't know. This is what I saw. This is where it was at. They're going to want every ounce of detail. And then at some point, usually they'll ask you, do you want to remain anonymous or do you want to be still liable for your tip? Meaning, would you be willing to be interviewed by an investigator for the case as well?
Someone's asking, are there boys who are victims? So much as what you said has been girls and stuff like that. Are there?
Because the largest majority of our victims are girls. I think by nature we say girls, but there is a large population of boys that are exploited. We kind of had our first experience with probably one of a really bad situation in eastern Kansas. A boy, his mom was a stripper and a drug addict, and she would pimp him out at the local truck stops and to men in the neighborhood. He didn't identify as homosexual, and so it started drawing attention because he was very resistant. She fled across over into Canada, where she continued her drug binging and exploiting him to where she died of overdose. And the stripper that he was now living with, that he had no idea who she was, or really, except just here's this girl that she's living with, called back to the officials in Kansas, actually the FBI. He was able to come back home. He's HIV positive now, was graduating last year, so a really solid young man, but his story was just heart-wrenching to hear. And so, yeah, we see that. Actually, probably more, you'll see more of that around what I would say truck stop prostitution and in more major cities than you would see in some cities. The other thing about boys that are being exploited, especially for in that lifestyle, it seems to be a more violent type trafficking versus a woman. In fact, you can find, we found two young ladies that were 28 and 30 out of Michigan that had been trafficked for 13 years that were for lack of better terms, not mentally messed up, but weren't like too bad off, to be honest. And the sad thing is you don't find men or young men at that age, at that point, what happens to them is a very violent type deal, because a lot of the guys are closet homosexual. And then they feel guilty, or it's a choke and strangle out thing. And so there's a higher death rate, it seems to be, with male prostitutes than it is with female prostitutes, or boys that are exploited versus girls that are exploited.
So maybe you answered this question earlier, but one of them asked just where do we go from here? How can we continue to make a difference in our community?
Very first thing is awareness. Don't throw out stuff that's not true. For those of you that raised your hands or clapped that said Facebook is your social media platform of choice, just because it's on Facebook does not make it true. All right? Don't throw those things out. Don't throw out anything that's not true, because I want people that really want to have a conversation about this to be able to freely have that conversation. I want people. I said something earlier about Wayfair, right? There was this whole thing that there was items being sold on Wayfair that had the names of children that were missing in NCMEC, or the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children, and they're buying dressers for $30,000 or chairs for $50,000 or whatever the case may be. Totally false. It was fake news. It was not true. Both federal analysts as well as most lead analysts in the nation that started exploring it, there was no truth to it whatsoever. The positive thing to that was that, like I said at the beginning, it started a conversation. And I think that's where we need to be today. If you're here, I'm a minister as well, okay? Probably the worst thing that has happened in the church is we don't talk about taboo things. Well, this is a dark subject. You can't talk about sex in church. You can't talk about prostitution in church. When Jesus hung out with sinners and prostitutes and all this on a regular basis, why? Because he said there's no need for me to, if I'm bringing healing, there's no need for me to be around the well when I need to be around the sick, so to speak. So you can't help someone if you're not around it. So I think it's very important that we have healthy, open conversations, both in our churches and our businesses and our schools. It needs to be something that we can have conversations with people. The one thing about this world that I like is it doesn't matter what side of the political line you are, what your race is, we all see this as an atrocity, and we can come together mutually for once and fight something. Do I feel like we will snuff out human trafficking in our lifetime? I do not. I'm sorry. But we can make a difference. I had to resolve in myself that I'm going to help one person's life. And if you want to come hear me preach Sunday and Saturday night, you'll hear my sermon about that. I had to come to a place, because success rate for me was not, if you go out and you work hours and days on end and you only bring one victim home, and most people's eyes, well, you're a complete failure, because there was probably 2,000 victims in the area and you recovered one person. Well, we were everything to that person that night. So one's very important to me. So one's a really, really big number, and that's why there's importance to me about why we need to make a difference in one person's life. If you walk out of here tonight and you help someone get out of this lifestyle or prevent them, that's my wife's favorite thing. She says, I like to rescue people before they need rescuing. Yeah. If you can prevent it from happening, tonight was a 100% success in my book. I'll go home back to Mississippi and be a happy camper and eat turkey like you ain't ever seen, okay? Not a problem. But have the conversations. The next thing is, even if you know it's not popular or not what the victim wants, if you know someone that is in an exploited situation, do something. Don't wish it better. Do something. Even if they don't see it themselves, be a voice for the voiceless. If they're afraid, walk with them every step of the way. Even when it's the most nastiest and the scariest part about it, be there for them, because that is probably one of the toughest things that most victims would say is, I feel so alone now. I have nowhere to go. No one understands me. No one sees me. I have no one. And I think that's so important at that point that we need to be the one that helps them all the way through the process. They need someone in their life.
Next question was, once you get them out of the situation and they go through therapy and begin to get on the right track, then what? What do they do? Find jobs, go to school? What is their next step in life? What do you guys do to help them get on?
I
get
wish I
going?
could say that I get to see it all the way through the process. I am more on the front end. I'm more on the training and awareness, stings and recoveries. I'm not long-term care, victim care, results-driven, any of that. Uh, there are people that specialize in that. I've learned in this life, in this type of job, you find the 2 or 3 things that you're really good at, and you do those 2 or 3 things because there's someone else can do the other way better. And there's organizations and homes and places out there that do recovery way better than I could ever do. As we say back home, I could screw up a 1-car funeral. So in recovery, you need someone that understands that. And on top of it, in recovery, a female victim doesn't need a male guy trying to walk them through that process, because we're seen as the ones that's got them there most of the time anyway. So they need other females. And so I'm going to be honest with you, most long-term facilities, there's a difference between a safe house and a shelter or a long-term care facility. 2 different things. A safe house is you've taken the victim to a place. We've taken people to safe houses that either they're there for 24 hours or they're there for 4 weeks while the case is being processed, or while placement, long-term placement is built that then, or established that you can send them to. And then from there, sadly, I don't know all of those. Sometimes I get to get the stories back, but because now that's out of my wheelhouse, or that's gone into another district or into another jurisdiction, I no longer have control of what's happening in the placement. I only have what's happening immediately within the case. But most long-term care facilities have a minimum, a good one is going to have a minimum of they've got to be there 12 months. Because in there, they're going to have a really good drug addiction program, or partnered with a very good drug addiction facility that can help them through that. That's probably the worst thing about this, I'm going to be honest with you, is when you bring a girl in that has a very strong addiction, there's a lot of homes that says, well, if she's used in the last 4 weeks, we can't take her. Well, she's probably used in the last 4 hours, bro. That's how she works. That's how she gets through life. She self-medicates or whatever the case may be. She's using, so where do we put her? Oh, we'll send her to county. We'll let her detox. We'll put her through all. Well, you know what? You just killed the success rate of her getting anything, because what just happened to her now is what she was always told was going to happen to her in the first place. She's going to jail. That's all she sees. I'm going to jail. And so we need to start having more safe houses or more long-term care facilities that has a detox program on the front end of it, that when the victim's placed there, they can go there tonight, strung out, and start that process of healing from that point on. So I'm off my soapbox now.
Yeah. Another question came in. You said earlier if you had 48 hours in the area, you could figure some things out. If you had 2 days in Sartell, what would be the first thing you'd look for identifying trafficking?
Very first thing I would look at is a couple of things. I'd start looking at online ads and sites, different sites that we monitor on a regular basis, seeing what is the rates on those sites. Some of the things that I'm looking at is if the ads are advertising multiple girls, call-ins, call-outs. There's a number of things that we're going to monitor on that. Other things that we would watch is we'd watch hotels, especially hotels that are, believe it or not on the worst side of town. Everyone thinks it's the hotel on the bad side of town. I'm looking at the hotels that's full of utility workers, or that has a high male population increase. Those are the ones that, or there's a game in town and you got guys here for something like that. Those are the types of areas that I'm going to monitor, see if there's a regular drop off and pickup of a girl or girls on a regular basis to this hotel, things like that.
This is a great one. It says, what's the number one thing to look for as a teacher?
Whoa. If you're an educator in this room, I can just tell you right now, you're my hero.
Especially this year.
We love teachers. We love to watch what you do. But the number one thing is just what we were talking about, a change in a student's life. Most educators know more about the kids in their classroom than their parents know about them. Why? Because they spend more time with them than most parents spend with them in the first place. And you start seeing the change in someone's life. You start seeing the things happening. We've had it. In fact, the 5-year-old, we had a 6-year-old's case that all of a sudden this 6-year-old started her period in class one day. And it wasn't because of that. It was because she had vaginal trauma from being raped by her stepdad and then sold 7 times that night to other men. And so the damage is what made her bleed. And guess who found it? It was the educator in the class. and she was the one that was able to start that process and get the help. The other one is if you're seeing a change in the student's life, she's been your best student or he's been your best student, and he's been really great. Something traumatic has changed in his life, or all of a sudden here's this other person in his life. Or if you try to have parent-teacher conferences and all of a sudden this new guardian comes into play. When I'm saying this, there's a ton of things that we can actually talk about as an educator, as red flags to watch out for. Does the young lady that she's in, and you were walking down by the desk and you happen to see in her purse and she has 3 or 4 different hotel key cards in there? Those are the type red flags. Or if she has a lot of like hotel lotions and soaps in her bag, or just numerous things that we can get into.
This one says, what sites are you looking ads? Is that in the open? Like these things are hidden?
Yeah,
like,
none of this. We do not work in dark web. I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm not going to list the sites just for the simple fact. If you're working in an organization, we can sit down and talk about sites that we monitor. I'm not going to throw these out, because the majority of these ad sites are pornographic. My wife and her team has had to sit down and scrub and look at sites. I'm not going to go to those areas. I'm not going to make you go. If guys, we're sight creatures. It's going to stick in our mind. I'm not going to send you there, okay? But basically, it used to be Backpage.com, right? Yeah, Backpage was great. Backpage got shut down. That was the best thing that ever happened, except for us, because we could take the temperature of a community very quick by how many ads are on Backpage. But guess what? I will say Craigslist is still advertising. It just does it in a different fashion. Typical ad sites like dating sites, whether you're using Tinder or anything like that, can be used. Those are some of just the basic ones, but then there are other ones that are prostitution advertising sites and stuff that we monitor as well.
This one came in for parents. What can parents do? You mentioned social media. What can parents do social media wise to just be there for their kids?
Jay Houston, the guy that I was referencing earlier that works for ICAC in Mississippi, he's just not some redneck in Mississippi that monitors child safety. He is one of the leading national ICAC analysts and prosecutors in the nation, and he also goes to Europe on a regular basis and now is an official trainer for Interpol in Europe. So Jay knows the internet. This is what Jay said whenever asked, what's the worst app out there today? And he says, any app that, because I was going to make like a pamphlet to give parents, and he says, any app that a parent can someone can communicate and the message be delete is a dangerous app. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So we can talk Whisper, we can talk Kick, we can talk hidden apps, we can do all of that. But he says, your regular text messaging can be a dangerous app. Facebook Messenger can be a dangerous app. Xbox, PlayStation communications back and forth can be a dangerous app. So I said, what can parents do to protect their kids? He says the best software. There's tons of software out there that you can download for your students and for your kids. But the best ones are subscription-based. I'm just going to be honest with you. And the one that he references right now is Bark, B-A-R-K, just like a dog barking, bark.us. He says is the best app right now for monitoring anything that's happening on phones, especially when it involves exploitation, communication, inappropriate communications. You can set it, and there's no back door to get through it like other ones have on it. And so with that, I contacted Bark and said, hey, do we have permission to put your logo up in our school assemblies and show that parents and educators and stuff use the Bark? And they said, better than that. If you'll tell people about bark.usa and tell them if they go to the special part on there where you can put in like a, what is it?
Promo code?
A promo code. If you'll use the promo code, say something 10, all one word, say something 10, you get a 10% discount on that, and then they help our nonprofit in the process. So cheap, shameless plug there. But in all honesty, he said it's hands down the best app to help it. So there are other ones out there, but if you really want to protect your kids, $5 a month, $8 a month really isn't nothing.
I'm not seeing a ton more questions. If people have them, you can feel free to raise your hands if you have other questions. If anybody has anything else in the room.
Yes, ma'am.
You referenced that pimps are male. How often do you see female?
Several as well. Most times when you see female pimps, usually the female pimps is more in a familial situation where it's usually a mom that has an addiction, or you start seeing which is a girl that was probably a bottom girl with a pimp. she was a bottom means that she's the top of the girls. It doesn't make sense. I understand, but because of that, maybe she's lost her pimp. Pimp died. Pimp got busted, and she assumes his game, and then she would become the pimp because that's her lifestyle. She knows how to work it, and a lot of times, if it's a female pimp, she's also she still works as well too. So.
When would it be okay to maybe take it into your own hands? And let me add a little bit of context. For example, I work as a youth pastor in the state of Virginia. I'm just visiting here on leave. And there was a lot of signs that I, just kind of were red flags. I didn't really put anything together. I just was like, okay, something's going on. She used to be the happiest person. Now all of a sudden she was crying. She had weird marks that I didn't know what were from. And she seemed more scared to go home than normal. Like she didn't want to go home, and so it ended up not amounting to anything within the trafficking. There was some at-home abuse, but not trafficking. But I would not let her go home until the police arrived. I don't know, was that something I should have done, or?
I was going to ask, what does taking matters into your own hand look like? Because taking matters into your own hands and taking matters into my wife's own hands could be two different things. It would take bleach and a water hose if my wife took it into her own hands to fix it. Yours might take a bunch of lawyers. Trust me, my wife scares me with things that she thinks about guys that exploit children. And I have to be that way as myself. But I will say this, the fact that you got law enforcement involved immediately, she probably was not thrilled about it going down that way, if I had to guess. But again, as I was saying earlier, sometimes you have to do what is not popular. Sometimes you have to do not what's like because it's in the best interest of the victim. The other thing is if you're a youth pastor and you see that or you experience that, you're under a mandatory report liability just like any educator or someone else is in liability of a student. So yes, if a kid comes up to you and says, my dad beats me, well, you can't go beat dad. But you got to file a mandatory report immediately. You can't go to pastor and say, Pastor, well, I think we need to sit down and talk with Dad about this, see if it's true on both. You're not an investigator. That's not your job. Your job as a protector and as a minister is to go ahead and make the mandatory report that night before it even leaves your youth building or whatever. Anybody else? This goes back to your child protective services. If you've called the cops, I need you here. There's a child that's in an abusive situation, and she just confessed that this is what's happening, or he just confessed this is what dad's doing or mom's doing. When he gets there, he's supposed to have already notified CPS. He's not even supposed to leave the scene till CPS has been notified. Now, I have seen police departments that kind of, well, we'll process this in the morning. We're going to go interview mom and dad. In Mississippi, I will say if the police do it that way, I have to say that's probably the best decision, because my wife and I have had cases that were reported, and then all of a sudden CPS calls the mom and says, oh, we just got this report that your kid said this. We'll be there in 48 hours to investigate it. And guess what? It's an empty home by the time they get there, or everything is done changed, cleaned up, and fixed up just well. And so, but theoretically, by law enforcement is supposed to notify CPS immediately on the scene once they realize what's going down.
I don't know what happened, but this one just came in. You mentioned Vegas earlier. Is there question for smaller casinos in states that get watched?
We've seen stuff like the Mississippi Gulf Coast is like little Vegas now. So you go down Highway 90, there's casinos just stacked up. Most Native American reservations now have a casino on it. I'm just going to tell you, when people are having fun, when people are gathering up, usually you're going to see prostitution intertwined in it. I don't know how game betting is now, like gaming betting, betting on sports betting. as in Mississippi it just passed. That's the reason now we no longer go where the Super Bowl is. We go to Vegas every year and assist Las Vegas Metro during the Super Bowl, because they'll have over 1 million visitors flying to Vegas that week for placing bets and just partying leading up to the Super Bowl, regardless of where it's at. But I would say there's probably some elements at any casino around, especially if there's hotels attached to it and things like that. I don't know that it would probably be to the levels of what we would see in Vegas or even on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, where there's numerous casinos. But I'm just going to tell you, none of it surprises me anymore. It could be a dental convention in town, and you got 450 dentists at a hotel, and you're going to see prostitution probably bump up. When you see prostitution bump up, you know human trafficking is all interwoven in it. And so it's the rule of thumb: when population increases, prostitution increases. When prostitution increases, trafficking increases. Natural disasters, we've seen it. We're in Hurricane Central, where we live at. And whenever it comes in, guess what comes in directly, immediately behind hurricanes? Utility workers are putting up poles and all that, and then cleanup crews, and then construction crews coming in and rebuilding everything. So all your hotels are slammed full of these types of people. Well, in that, pimps know that their girls can make money on that, and they start showing up. So it doesn't matter. In certain levels that we do. Just for the simple fact is the production of it. Like in stings, you'll have guys send pictures of themselves and request a picture back and those natures. Or if they say, hey, here's a we actually had a guy in the last sting that sent pictures of his daughter that he said he had raped and stuff. And so in those levels, but as far as actually, if you're trying to buy or view child pornography, we don't get into that, because usually that is in a darker web type selling mode, and that's strictly through the federal guys and through the fusion centers that run those.
When does the CPS get fixed if it's broken in parts of the country?
You can legislate a lot of things. It just doesn't mean it's going to happen. Sadly, as right now, I've seen legislation, and that is happening in Mississippi. The legislation in Mississippi they're revamping the whole structure of child protective services. Hopefully through the restructure now will determine how things are passed to the county. Instead of the county having so much choices of how and when they want to respond, then it will be directed solely from the state. And that's how that structure is having to change, because too many chiefs and not enough Indians. And you start having people make their own decisions how they want to run things. So,
How can people learn more about Free International if they want to get more information?
freeinternational.org is our website. You can go there. We're on social media, all the social media. So you can look us up on there. We also lead missions trips. If you want to see it firsthand in Las Vegas, we have a thing called LasVegasMissions.com. And there's multiple dates on there that you can sign up and come. The only thing about Las Vegas Missions is this: if you've got to be 18 years or older to come to it. You got to be 21 years or older if you want to go to the brothels and things, because that's the law in Vegas. Before you have to be 21 or older to go in a brothel. So, but you're welcome to go through any of our social media sites. Say Something School Assembly. We have a website, SaySomethingAssembly.com, as well as the freeinternational.org. And I think there's my social media, and my email address is jody@freeinternational.org. I don't think it's up there, but if you shoot me an email, I try to respond to them in a timely fashion. I get a bunch of them, but if it was a question or a link, I can send you something or whatever you need that way. So, anything else?
Sweet. I think that's it. Thank you so much, Jody. Thank you guys all for coming out tonight. We're gonna have this recorded, and we'll have it available if you would like to view this later on, or maybe you have people that you want to show it to. We already had a number, probably 20 people reach out and say, hey, we want a recording of tonight. We can't make it. And so we'll try to get this sent out to you guys, a link. So if anybody wants to use this, sorry. Oh, sorry. If anybody wants to use this to send out, or they have staff or teachers or anything like that, because I know there's educators in the house and stuff, and so we're just so thankful that you guys came out and wanted to come and view this. Would you guys just give a round of applause for Jody? We're so grateful that he was able to come and share with us tonight. Thank all of you guys. Like I said earlier, Central Minnesota Sexual Assault Center is here. You can check out their stuff if you have questions. Also, Jody said he's available if you want to come and chat with him as well. Thank you guys so much. Have a great night.